Hi everyone, I'm so excited to bring you again another amazing guest and speaker from the Global Innovation Forum here in London. I'm here with Cheng. He's Director Health and Performance at Google. Welcome, Newton.
Thank you for having me.
And he's had an amazing presentation today that I'm so happy to share a bit more of the inside and the behind the scenes of that experience. So Newton, tell us what you do at Google first.
So I'm Director of Health and Performance, which means I oversee a suite of amenities that support what we like to say is physical, mental, and social health and well-being of Google employees. Mm-hmm. So basically, I'm trying to help employees be healthy while also performing at their best, both in work, but especially life.
And it's interesting that you do this work, but on the side, what you told us today is that you have a much bigger mission and vision about how to help people at large out in the world with the topic of mental health. So tell us a little bit about this side project.
Yeah, so what I'd like to say is that my broader mission, both inside and outside of Google, is to help create a culture of well-being that inspires people around the world to take care of themselves and each other. And so the way that's manifested is that outside of Google, I'm a mental health advocate and public speaker. And the way I arrived at that was via my own mental health struggles. And that's one way to say it. That's kind of like the safe way to say it. But what was really going on was what I thought started during the pandemic. I started to really struggle with my mental health. So we all leaned in. We tried to help the organization get through a really tough time during the pandemic. And it felt like the right thing to do. But what I found was pandemic for us in the US, it started in March. By the summer, I remember I was sitting in a team meeting. It was my vice president who I report to, so fairly senior people. And we're all on video chat. We're going around the screen, answering the prompt, "How are you doing?" And my friend who was on the call sent me a chat message and said, "I feel like people aren't being real. Can you say something real when it gets to you?" And I'm like, okay. And it got to me. And for whatever reason, it felt like something inside me kind of broke. And I started crying. And I said, right now, I'm struggling because the number of days I'm proud of how I'm showing as a father is going down. And I don't know how to turn that around. And so it was horrifying to me because for two reasons. One was, I had just broke down in front of my entire team and a lot of senior leaders at work. And then second, I had never said that out loud or even admitted that to myself. But once I said it out loud, I knew it was true. And so fast forward about a year and a half, and I was at a Google Health and Wellbeing conference about to give a keynote on the intersections between Google technology and health and well-being. And knowing that I had been struggling like that for so long, and knowing how many others were struggling like that, and we all knew the data around that, I didn't feel like I could hide my struggles and be authentic. So I threw out my talk and I told the entire audience that I had long been struggling with depression and anxiety, and I was ashamed of how I was showing up as a husband and father. And I was going to go on mental health leave because I didn't know what else to do. But what came out of that was, instead of my fears that this might ruin my reputation or ruin the conference, it shifted the conversation entirely and created this opportunity to have these open, vulnerable conversations around mental health that we couldn't have before. And so since then, I've continued to work on my mental health, but I've continued to tell my story so that we can drive more of those conversations and hopefully drive positive change around mental health.
I have to step a little back and ask you, in that video chat, because I'm still shook by that whole experience, how was it to break down like that and have those senior people look at you? What was the reaction? How did you feel in the moment? Because as someone that has worked in large corporations for, the majority of my career, for 20 years, I put myself into that situation and I would have been completely mortified. How did you feel and how did they react?
I wanted to crawl into a hole and die as soon as those words came out of my mouth. It was everything that I believed was, I just ended my career. I just ruined my reputation. I had so much shame. I felt weak. Like I am a professional in the field of health and well-being. I had 2 decades of experience and here I wasn't able to hold it together. To my team's credit, minutes later, they were all reaching out like, it's okay. Like, we're here to support you. Even my vice president. And I totally believed them. And it was a good aha for me that I knew their support was genuine. I knew that they weren't going to judge me for this, but I was judging myself like so strongly. Like it was almost like evidence that all the negative voices in my head that say, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, like I had just proven that to myself. And so it was painful.
Yeah. I can totally imagine. And behind the scenes of this conversation, you and I were talking about courage and fear, and how fear is driving a lot of the things that we do in our lives, right? The decisions that we make, the things that we think, the biases that we have are based on different types of fear, right? Comes from our families, from how we were brought up, our cultures. I come from Eastern Europe, for example, so I can tell you a whole story about, all the fears and the biases that we have there in the region, right? How did that defining moment transform your career? Because, by the way, he's still here. He's still working with Google.
Yeah, the world has not collapsed.
No.
Yeah.
How did your life change after that moment?
It took time. When I broke down in that meeting, that was summer 2020. The keynote I gave where I told people what was really going on, that was November 2021.
Wow.
So after that, I tried to suppress things again and say, I'm going to power through this. But it was around November 2020, I started to struggle to get out of bed. I think this was in the spring. I remember there was an incident where my daughter and we were in the kitchen. And so I'm playing kids' music. I'm trying to cook. She is, being loud and boisterous. And I was just carrying a lot of anxiety. And all of this was just fueling it. And at some point, I was so desperate for comfort, I just started plugging my ears. And I started just saying over and over and over, could you be quiet, please? Could you be quiet, please? And I closed my eyes and I just kept saying, could you be quiet, please? Could you be quiet, please? And then I heard my daughter's voice stop. And I opened my eyes and I look at her and she's confused and horrified. And seeing like a moment where your daughter might be questioning, like, is dad okay? Or am I safe and secure here? Like seeing a child question that, it really breaks you. And that was one of those moments where I said, I have to get help. And so it was around that time when I reached out to the employee assistance provider and found a therapist who told me I was showing early symptoms of burnout. Now, later on, and this was an eye-opener to me, which goes back to how we were raised, I found a new therapist, and he was doing an intake with me, and he said, you have major symptoms of depression and anxiety. And I said, like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you answered yes to all these things on the intake form. And I said, isn't this just what it's like to work hard? Mm-hmm. That's what my parents taught me. Like, this is how I've always powered through. Mm-hmm. And he said, yes, but it can also be depression and anxiety. And then the aha was what came out of my mouth next. I said, but I've felt like this off and on since high school. And what I realized was I thought I had only struggled with mental health through the pandemic. It's more likely I had struggled off and on with my mental health since childhood, but we never talked about mental health. I had no awareness of what it meant to struggle with your mental health. And I just thought this is what it's supposed to be like. You power through, you get it done. So at that point, that was now just a few months before we got to the keynote. But at that point, what I could see was I'm in a bad place. We had talked about the concept of courage. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like I'm afraid, I'm terrified of further hurting my family. Something needs to change. And so that's when, in a few months, I opened up on that stage and told the audience what was really going on. And after that, I knew I needed the space and I went on mental health leave.
Would you call that your critical moment of truth? Because in my experience, and it relates so much to what you're saying and your upbringing and the idea of working hard, it was exactly the same for me. And I think that, same as you, I realized in my 40s that I probably struggled with this since childhood.
Yeah.
But because we don't talk about it, as you say, it wasn't something that I was aware of. And only many years later, in my early 40s, did I realize that. And I realized that when, just like you, I reached a point that I call the critical moment of truth, that it's almost like the patterns that you've been engaging with your entire life start to break down for whatever reason. There's something that happens that break those patterns down, and then it's like a veil goes away and you start to piece things together. Maybe you need the help, but you start to understand that pattern doesn't do you any good anymore, or it doesn't help you in any way. I wonder if that was the same for you.
It's not like it all came together in the moment, but it gave me reason to question so much about my past, where I had to start it forced me to start rewriting my own stories about
Yeah.
my past, what I believed strength was, what I believed made me successful. It also made me think about what are all the ways that I coped. Like, for example, so I mentioned in my presentation, I'm a world champion powerlifter. I do genuinely love the sport. It's also an outlet to redirect a lot of negative energy. Honestly, I used to drink a lot more. And at some point I had to ask, were you drinking so much? Like eventually I just had to stop because I got older and my body would just said no. But looking back, I had to ask, like, why is so much of your socializing centered around drinking? And it was an excellent way, honestly, to numb a lot of feelings. And so all those things, you started to ask, why did you do that? Like, was it really just because that's who you are, because it was fun? Or did you not know how to cope? And a lot of it was, I didn't know how to cope.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have different coping mechanisms. For me as well, when I think about it, food is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
For me, for example, work
Yeah.
is a coping mechanism. And one thing that I learned when, as you say, the critical moment of truth doesn't bring it all together magically for you, but it almost like opens the door to a new path that you need to build for yourself. And what I realized then was that I had to figure out a way to put my high energy into different things. That's one thing. But the other thing is also, it needs to be coupled with some kind of a purpose of how I can use that gift that I was given to help other people. And I wonder if that's the same for you, because by the sound of it, you're now using all this experience to help many others around the world.
Yes. So I'll give the positive aspirational path, and then the other analogy of what it looks like when that door opens. So the positive analogy is, when you are given struggle, or when I'm given struggle, like, I can choose to let it beat me down, or I can say, this is a gift that I never asked for. And it's going to be painful, but I can turn this into meaning if I'm willing to lean into it. And so that's really what I've tried to do. And so one thing I was talking with another attendee about, they were asking, do you feel like doing all these presentations helps you process? And it does, but one of the ways it does that is I didn't realize how, the analogy I use is that hiding my mental health is like wearing this really heavy, heavy mask. And you don't know how heavy it is till you take it off. And so if someone told me the way you're going to process this is you're going to do presentations on your mental health in front of your professional network for the rest of your career, I would have said, hell no. But now that I have the mask off and I'm rid of that burden, I would say, yeah, I would prefer to do these presentations for the rest of my life if I never have to put that mask back on. So that's the aspirational side. The less aspirational side is door open. The way I was talking about this with another friend who also went on leave was, once you have that realization, it's almost like you open that old garage that you've been meaning to clean out, and you open it up and you're just looking and you see the years of accumulated junk, and you take away the first layer, and then you find a new layer of accumulated junk and you say, oh my gosh, I forgot that was there. Then you take that away and you find a dead skunk and you go, I didn't even know that was there. And it just keeps coming and coming, and it gets better over time, but it's really daunting. But once you see how cluttered that garage is, there's no choice but to clean it out.
Yeah, and there's no point in closing the door and walking away, because I know a few people that would do that.
Yes.
Actually, friends of mine that said, I kind of opened the door, looked inside, didn't like what I saw there, so I closed it down and I never want to look again. Well, guess what? You're going to have to open it eventually.
You can't unsee it once you've seen it.
No, but the fact of the matter is, as you said, that once you lose that mask, which is so heavy,
yes.
It's also a way of continuing the healing, isn't it? By talking about it and helping other people, it's a way for yourself to also heal.
Yeah. I used to think healing meant it's almost like a wound heals and then disappears. Mm-hmm. And I don't think of healing that way anymore. It's like you have the wound, you need to integrate it into yourself. Like, you will always carry the wound, but how do you live with it in a positive way? And so, the memories of the pain, it's still there, but I recognize it for what it is, and I can see it, and I can, rather than suppress it, I can embrace it as just part of my experience and what makes me who I am today. And regardless of all the ups and downs and mistakes, I'm proud of who I am today.
I'm proud of you too, by the way. And
Thank you.
I'm proud to see people that are speaking out. I'm also proud of myself.
I'm proud of you as well.
Well done.
Heck yeah.
Yes, come on. What do we want to leave the people that are watching us with? What's the main takeaway or the main learning for you out of this experience that you've lived?
Yeah, so in line with the talk I did, I think on the one hand, learning, well, a few things. Vulnerability, especially in places like the workplace, is a learned skill. And so that's one of the things that via these talks and workshops that I do that I try to teach to business leaders. And now I'm also working with military in academics and with students. Beyond that, figuring out how to be vulnerable, that is taking off that mask. It's that in and of itself is such a boost to your life that I recommend it for everyone. Like there is no one who I'd say don't do it. Now, if you are able to do that, the upside of this that I didn't anticipate, the title of my talk is Vulnerability is an Innovation Superpower. When you can take off that mask, and that's consistently how you show up as a leader, you unlock superpowers for you and your team across psychological safety, resilience, and inspirational leadership. And so there is no downside to this.
Wonderful. Well, I hope that everyone who's watching is taking this amazing message from you and sort of makes it their own, I hope, right? So that more of us can lose this mask that we use every day. You know, it's a little bit like makeup, you know, you want to cover the imperfections, but actually it's more about uncovering.
Yeah.
Who you are is what makes us all beautiful. Is a friend of mine just sort of spoke that in this way to me a few days ago and kind of stayed with me. So thank you, Newton, for the work that you do, for the amazing message that you spread out in the world. And I'm so excited to follow your journey.
Thank you for the opportunity.